Welcome to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Teresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Teresa Tomeo.
Happy Wednesday during the fifth week of Lent. It is March 25th, of course, the Feast of the Annunciation, a beautiful feast day in the One Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. We have a great lineup for you this morning. We'll get to the rundown in a second. We'll also have your weather and your news, of course, on a Wednesday morning. A big thank you to Vanessa Denha-Garmo for filling in yesterday and Monday. She'll also be behind the microphone on Friday. And then the lovely, wonderful Sherry Brownring on a Thursday. So all the gals are coming in this week because they have somewhat of a crazy schedule. We are still in the motherland in Italy, and I'm doing a few assignments related to the book and some other projects here in Rome. In the meantime, though, on a Wednesday on the Feast of the Annunciation, we have a fantastic show for you lined up. I don't know if you were listening last week in the second hour of the program when I interviewed this amazing young man about Digital Detox and this special program they have. And many, many colleges and high schools and individuals have taken part in this, and it's really helped them with their media issues. And we all have media issues, let's be honest. But the name of the organization is actually a word that they made up. It's Humanality. I can never pronounce Humanality. That's what it is. Humanality. And the website is humanality.org. Humanality. Humanality.org. And it combines being a human with reality. And he'll explain it. It really is quite brilliant. They made up the word for their mission and their website. But he's a revert to the faith, again, and he's got a great story. But what they're trying to do is really raise awareness and have us look at the world as we should be looking at it in terms of human ways, through the eyes, right, of the dignity of the human person. So I'm going to share that interview with you. And then we're going to be talking with Friar Luca di Pasquale from Assisi. He's assigned there. His family, his heritage is actually from Abruzzo. He is Italian, based here in Italy, very involved in the event surrounding the year of St. Francis. And I met him at St. Mary of the Angels about a week and a half ago after Mass at St. Mary of the Angels, the English Mass. And we were talking with him, and he said, I'd really like to come on and explain the success, of course, of the relics, which ended last weekend. And then also he wants to talk about some of the other major events that are coming up this year during the year of St. Francis, which actually will be running through January, the middle of January, as the Pope declared this holy year of St. Francis. So he's very knowledgeable on the great San Francesco and all the different activities. We'll also get his take on how he thought the whole veneration episode went. I think it went very beautifully, very smoothly. It was very reverent, as I mentioned in an article I wrote for Catholic Exchange last week. But I really think you'll enjoy what Friar Luca has to say about the great San Francesco, St. Francis. And also, if you're on your way to Italy this year for the year of St. Francis, or if you're just going to be visiting Assisi, he will give you an idea of just how important this great saint is as a reminder and a little bit more detail. So that is the show for this morning on a Wednesday, March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation. Right now, let's get started with the news and the weather here on EWTN. First, the weather for you. The National Weather Service saying this morning record-breaking heat expected in the central and western part of the country for the next several days. Gusty winds and low relative humidity will create elevated to critical fire weather conditions over portions of the Rockies and High Plains, both today and tomorrow. Rain and mountain snow are also possible across the Pacific Northwest into the Rockies through the rest of the day today. A few minutes past the hour now on a Wednesday morning. Let's check the news here on EWTN. Pope Leo XIV renewing his appeal for peace in a brief statement yesterday evening to a group of reporters waiting for him outside Villa Barberini, the residence in Castel Gandolfo. Recalling the international situation, Holy Father said hatred is increasing, violence keeps getting worse, more than 1 million people are isolated, and there are so many dead. He said we want to pray for peace, but he's urging all authorities to work through dialogue to resolve problems. President Trump, meanwhile, expressing optimism in the Iran conflict, saying it will end soon. Addressing reporters from the Oval Office yesterday, the president saying talks with Iran have been going well, adding the U.S. is dealing with the right people in the Islamic Republic. Trump saying Iran has now agreed not to pursue a nuclear weapon, adding that Iran has also offered a significant gift to the U.S. during the talks. He said it was related to oil and gas, but he would not reveal what it is at this point. And Mark Mayfield tells us there are reports that Iran apparently would prefer talking with Vice President Vance to end the conflict in the Middle East.
The New York Post cites sources saying the regime has signaled it wants to deal directly with Vance instead of Steve Witkoff or Jared Kushner. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt responded to the Post report, saying it's President Trump's choice to decide who will negotiate on his behalf, not Tehran's. She added Vance, Secretary of State Rubio, Special Envoy Witkoff, and Kushner will all be involved. The Guardian is also reporting that Iranian officials don't want to deal with Witkoff or Kushner, who led the previous talks with Iran. I'm Mark Mayfield.
The United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, has appealed to the international community to halt the violence plaguing the Middle East and allow unhindered access to provide emergency humanitarian aid to over 1.2 million children who have been displaced in Iran and Lebanon. The UN agency's deputy executive director warning that across the Middle East, a generation of children is being pulled deeper into crisis and is paying a devastating price due to it. And the Pope is also warning that children must not come to see artificial intelligence chatbots as substitutes for real friendship, cautioning that such reliance could harm their intellectual and emotional development. The Holy Father adding we must not allow children to end up believing that they can't find or they can find in artificial intelligence chatbots their best friends or the oracle of all knowledge, dulling their intelligence and their capability for relationships and numbing their creativity and thinking. EWTN News reporting Leo making the remarks in a message that was published in an Italian weekly supplement dedicated to children, marking its 30th anniversary. In that context, he urged adults to safeguard childhood and guide the growth of children so they may become protagonists of a renewed world. And a jury in New Mexico is saying Meta failed to safeguard its Facebook and Instagram apps from online predators targeting children. The judge in the case announcing the verdict yesterday.
Did Meta violate the Unfair Practices Act by engaging in an unfair or deceptive trade practice? The jury answers yes.
The ruling on Tuesday follows weeks of testimony that pitted the state against a social media giant in a civil case that could also impact several similar cases across the country. Meta must now pay out $375 million in damages for violating New Mexico's Unfair Practices Act. But Meta says it will indeed appeal. The Supreme Court taking up a high-profile case yesterday involving a government policy that turns away asylum seekers before they can reach the U.S. border with Mexico. Representing the Trump administration was Assistant to the U.S. Solicitor General Vivek Suri.
Respondent's position is that when Congress said arrives in the United States, it meant stopped outside the United States. That theory is wrong for the simple reason that it defies the statutory text.
That policy was enacted during the Obama administration and was significantly brought in during the first Trump administration. It's no longer in place after being rescinded by President Biden 4 years ago. However, the Trump administration calls it a critical tool for addressing surges in immigration at the border, and court observers say the justices appeared at least somewhat sympathetic to that argument. And London police are investigating an incident involving ambulances belonging to the Jewish community being set on fire. Officials saying the apparent arson attack is being treated as an anti-Semitic hate crime. It happened earlier this week when 4 ambulances belonging to a Jewish community ambulance service were lit on fire. No injuries were reported. There have been no arrests, but police say they believe there are 3 people involved. And the heat dome that has millions in the Southwest suffering record-setting temperatures, as we mentioned in the weather forecast, making its way to the southern plains. Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas bracing for record highs this week. Parts of the Midwest could also be affected. Meanwhile, the heat wave is nowhere near over in the Southwest, with high temperatures expected through the rest of the week. And authorities in southern Arizona are investigating a possible incident at Nancy Guthrie's home 3 weeks ago before she was abducted. Liz Kurtz reports that as the investigation continues, members of the local community continue to hope that she will be found.
At one of Nancy's favorite Tucson restaurants, El Charro, all servers are now wearing a symbol of hope. These yellow ribbons made by 2 women from out of state. It's something they did in 2003 when Lacey Peterson went missing, and in 2005 for Natalie Holloway.
The 84-year-old mother of Today's Show host Savannah Guthrie is believed to have been taken from her home in the early hours of February 1st. The local sheriff's office confirming that the department is now looking into a situation that took place 3 weeks ago before her disappearance.
Mark Wayne Mullen is now Homeland Security Secretary. In a ceremony at the White House on Tuesday, the president calling it a great day because he has a great deal of confidence in the new pick. The Oklahoma Republican senator taking the reins during a tumultuous time at the agency with the DHS shutdown in its 6th week, and it led to long lines at TSA checkpoints and airports throughout the country. The president tapping Mullen after he fired Kristi Noem and moved her as special envoy for the Shield of America, the anti-drug initiative in the Western Hemisphere. And Jack Crumley says tax season is back, and so is that child tax credit.
As families gear up for tax season, the child tax credit is once again front and center. CPA Lisa Green-Lewis with TurboTax.
That credit is a credit you get for each dependent under 17.
For 2025 returns, the credit remains $2,200 per qualifying child under the age of 17, up to $1,700 refundable for many households. Green-Lewis says there are some restrictions.
It does have income thresholds, so if you're single and if you earn $200,000 and under, you would get the full credit. If you're married filing jointly, it's $400,000.
The IRS is reminding parents that even those who don't normally file may still be eligible for a refund through the additional child tax credit. Your dependent child must have lived with you for more than half the year. And don't forget, the tax filing deadline is Wednesday, April 15th at midnight.
And several neurologists in Argentina are using tango, the tango dance, as a type of therapy for Parkinson's patients. They say the slow, short steps in the country's national dance help with mobility, balance, and coordination issues. The program at a facility in Buenos Aires, which began 15 years ago, is designed to give Parkinson's patients strategies to use in everyday activities. And finally, in our newscast on a Wednesday morning, Jim Roop tells us NASA is announcing plans to build a $20 billion base on the surface of the moon.
The move means, however, the agency's canceling plans to deploy a space station in lunar orbit, which was billed the Lunar Gateway Station. The update was unveiled as part of the agency's Ignition event, outlining multiple initiatives aimed at landing on the moon by the end of 2028. NASA's revamped initiatives come as China challenges the U.S.'s position as the world's leader in space exploration after the nation announced it was on track to land astronauts on the moon by 2030. I'm Jim Roop.
It is a Wednesday morning. We appreciate your listenership here at EWTN. We'll be right back. Let's be honest, it's not just for Lent, but we can all from time to time use a digital detox. If you remember several years ago, there was a big report that came out from the previous Surgeon General talking about a pandemic of loneliness and mentioning that the media, in particular social media, had a lot to do with that, where even though we have all these ways to connect, we're feeling more isolated and we're becoming more addicted. And we should be backing up and talking to real people in real time and real FaceTime. Humanility, it's a new word that was made up to address this issue. And on the phone with us is Andrew Laubacher. He's the Executive Director of Humanility. You can find out more at humanility.org. Andrew, let me start by saying, first of all, thank you for this program. I can't wait to dive in. But also, explain the word. Where did that come from?
Yeah, humanility is a word that combines humans engaging reality. Really, the whole mission of humanility is to help people be human and use technology with intentionality. So we're helping people engage reality and be more human in a tech-addicted world.
Okay, so how did you get involved? What brought you to Humanility?
Yeah, so I've been a musician actually my whole life. I had my reversion back to my Catholic faith when I was 19. I went to Franciscan, got my degree in theology, philosophy there, and then went pretty much straight into traveling full-time, playing music. And had a band, and most of my life was on the road. And I'm a millennial, so I had every social media platform at that point. I experienced all the negative consequences of scrolling, lust, comparison, waste of time, on these platforms, and deleted everything in 2018. Went back to a flip phone. I was just this kind of random musician roaming around the earth with a flip phone, playing all these events, and I experienced so much benefit from that decision. And a couple years later, the founders of Humanility, Hope and Justin Schneer, started this organization through this unplugged scholarship at Franciscan, where they paid students scholarship money to give up their smartphone and take a dumb phone. And then Humanality was kind of born, and they brought me on to kind of lead the charge of this movement, and it was just kind of a perfect fit.
So is the Humanality program mainly the Digital Detox wellness program, or are there other aspects of it?
So it's evolved. We started, as clubs on college campuses, and as we grew that, we started to realize, one, there's a need everywhere. There's a need in high schools, there's a need in families, there's a need in the workplace. And so we started with these 7 universities and these clubs. We had over 300 students. We gave out 100 light phones. Students started going on phone-free hikes and phone-free concerts and getting out of all their different addictions and their technologies. And then, I built out these 11 Humanality ways. The more I studied the depth of the problem, which is vast and sadly way far worse than most people understand, even though I think most people would acknowledge there's definitely something off. Mm-hmm. These 11 Humanality ways that you go through in this detox are really all the antidotes to the negative trade-offs that some of these technologies have created in our lives.
So one of the questions that you address in the program, the detox program, is why the little glass box is in the phone and even, and other types of technologies. Why are they so addicting, do you think?
Yes, so this is all by design. So this isn't, conspiratorial. This is actually just from the founders. So if you listen to founders at, these platforms, specifically, Meta, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, these platforms were designed to addict. Sean Parker, who's one of the first user growth founders, essentially said this is exactly the product that a hacker like myself would create. It exploits vulnerabilities in human psychology. So they're preying upon, really good things that God created in us, like our desire to connect socially. But they've been embedded with these abusive designs, namely social comparison, infinite scroll. You're getting hits of dopamine every time you experience novelty. And they make these companies a lot of money, right? These apps aren't free. They actually cost you an incredible amount of time. Your average teenager's around 8 hours and 39 minutes of phone time a day. Mm-hmm. Low-income communities around 10 hours a day. Your average American family is actually watching 257 hours of entertainment a month, which is about 10 days a month, So they're actually designed to exploit our time and attention, and that actually is how the model works.
We're talking with Andrew Laubacher, who's the executive director of Humanality. Humanality.org is a website, and discussing, and we'll get to more specifics, the Digital Detox Wellness Program. I'm sure you've been watching and following with much interest the big trials that are going on right now. There's one in California and one in New Mexico with these social media outlets. And what's coming out is so interesting. A lot of these emails and memos. And as you said, people pretty much knew this, at least people who are, thinking about it and the causes of addiction. Emails showing, it reminds me a lot, and you're probably too young to remember this, but it reminds me a lot of when we first started learning about the addictive nature of tobacco. And there was a movie with Russell Crowe, who was one of the whistleblowers, who produced all this evidence that they knew exactly what they were doing in terms of addictions and how addictive nicotine is or was and is. And I see a lot of similarities between that. How about you?
Yeah, I've studied this pretty deeply. This is in Gaia Bernstein's book, Unwired. This is the exact analogy that I give. We're in the middle of discovering that, tobacco is carcinogenic. And this is exactly the playbook they're using, science wars. So, Jonathan Haidt and many others have pretty much shut down any of the debate of, is this causal? Is this just correlational? Like we have the evidence. So they're trying to confuse the population with science wars, First Amendment and personal responsibility, saying, well, then you need to, use this technology better. It's up to you, and it's your fault if you can't control it. So these are all lies, right? This is the same playbook that tobacco used. We're just in the moment where we're finding that social media, pornography, gaming, a lot of these technologies are carcinogenic. They're toxic to our human psychology. And while the phones can do a lot of good stuff for us, I think once you try and actually break down the device and actually make it into what it is. It's a mobile supercomputer, okay? It's not a phone. It does way more than just call, right? So there's ways to actually like demify your smartphone, and we teach students and people how to do that to start to get their time and attention back. But yeah, we're in this major transition period of discovering that, wow, this is toxic, and there's ways to get out of it, and that's what we help people do.
I know that we don't want to get too much off track with these two big cases, but there's some talk that they're not going to rule in favor of the plaintiffs, because if they rule in favor of one or two or three people, then there's so many of these lawsuits that are out there. Quickly, before we take a break, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced this actually firsthand of meeting a parent at a random airport that started to talk to me about her son who died from a Snapchat overdose of fentanyl that he received just being in Snapchat. So these are, if I'm experiencing that just from a random conversation, like there are thousands and thousands of people that have been affected by these platforms. So yeah, I think they're throwing trillions of dollars at this. Sadly, the system's not set up for, success on this side.
We're going to take a quick break, Andrew. When we come back, so much more to talk about. Now, you mentioned your reversion to the Catholic faith, and I want to hear, of course, how the Catholic faith is playing into this so deeply, and the Church has so many important and beautiful teachings on media usage and can help us how to use the media wisely. We will be right back. More on this issue of Humanility from Andrew Laubacher, the Executive Director of Humanility.org. Digital Detox, there's a wellness program available, and several hundred people have already gone through the program. We'll talk about it more up next. Such an important conversation and such important work. Andrew Laubacher is Executive Director of Humanility. We're talking about a number of things, including their Digital Detox wellness program. We're getting to the details of that in a little bit, but again, the website, humanility.org. Humanality. Humanality, as he explained the meaning of the word earlier. Okay, I could talk to you about this forever because this is my baby. This is my area, a big area of my expertise in terms of media and media awareness. But to me, what you're doing is so important. But how do you balance it out with people? Because you still have a phone. So do you say just throw away the phone? How do you find balance in this? And you also mentioned during the break, and we can talk about the wonderful partnership with Halo. So there's a great example of what the Church gives us is using the media wisely with something like Halo, or even EWTN, right? We're all over the internet. We have great outlets and different types of, connections. So there has to be a balance, and that's what the faith is all about, balance, right?
Yeah, virtue is a huge part of what we're doing, and so we're really clear in our mission statement, like we're helping people discover freedom through an intentional relationship with technology. So that intentionality is your key, and the reality is to be intentional with these technologies, you most likely have to remove most of them from your digital device. So we help students go through this digital detox. We invite them to take what's called a digital plan of life. So it literally breaks down your relationship with every part of your device, and you create a plan, right? So if you're like, oh, I'm on my phone too much, I'm scrolling too much, like pretty much everyone's addicted in some capacity to their phone. This is seniors, this is boomers, this is millennials, this is Gen Z. The whole idea that this is like a teen problem, I think is hilarious. I would say like most adults are just as addicted as teenagers, right? So this is for everybody. But the idea is start to break down the device. Like, what are the real tools and what are the distractions? And so we'll invite students, first of all, just to demify their smartphone. Some real practical tips. You can go grayscale on your smartphone. The colors are being leveraged to addict you to your device. The reds, the blues, the bright colors. This is stimulating dopamine in your brain in a very specific way. The red alerts, the dings, pings, and rings, these are all part of a habit-forming process that we know from behaviors and many other different schools of psychological thought. So one way is just go grayscale on your phone. That takes away all the color. Take off any social media apps, gaming apps, news apps. Put those on the computer so that little bit of friction where you just can't take out the device and take a hit. You really have to start to think about these technologies as a drug. They're quite literally changing your neurophysiology in ways that real drugs do. So just because you can't ingest it doesn't mean it's not actually, changing your wiring. So you have to really start to look at it in that way. So go grayscale, take off any of these technologies, these apps, put them on your computer. That's just going to create some friction. That friction is going to create more freedom in your life. And just those little moments of space throughout your day where you would normally, scroll. Now, I know people still need to communicate and look at their texts and messages and things like that. We have ways to help with that overwhelm. Your average teenager is, texting 197 times a day.
Right.
Minimum. So I would actually even say, to a large degree, the text message and the email have been incredibly detrimental to society in many ways. I mean, it's distracted us to degrees that we, can't fully fathom. So anyway, there's deeper and deeper ways to hack the system to get intentionality back. It's going to look different for everybody, but in our program, we help you do that for yourself, and we give you kind of all the tools to do it.
We are talking with Andrew Laubacher. He's Executive Director of Humanility, humanility.org. Okay, I love this image on your website. You say throwing your phone out the window on a highway might give you glee, but it might also get you fired. What do you do for professionals, though, who have to keep in touch with their employers and maybe communicate quickly? How do you handle that?
Yeah, there's a lot of amazing research on this front. I use a lot of Cal Newport's work, deep work, digital minimalism, slow productivity. This guy's been in the space a long time, and, I'm pulling from a lot of other places of science. I mean, our whole detox is literally just a ton of data that I've compiled, over 40 books I've read on the subject. And so for professionals, I mean, the funny thing is, the more you can get intentional and create systems in your life with your technology, the more success you're going to have. So there's actually a study in the 70s by Paul Torrance called the Torrance Creative Test, and they analyzed students in Minneapolis, followed them for their whole life, and actually looked at their levels of creativity. And the people that had the highest levels of creativity actually performed better in life, they had just greater success. And that actually beat out IQ, area code, all of the other predictors. So the more you can increase boredom in your life, and Dr. Arthur Brooks is really talking about this a lot as of late, but the more you can actually increase boredom and space for your default mode network in the brain to turn on, the higher your creativity is going to go, and actually the better you're just going to perform in life in general. Mm-hmm. So it actually really benefits professionals to take a really, intense stab at, getting their time back, especially in the workplace, especially with your families. So many parents, are in the middle of this as well, and I have a lot of compassion for them because they have no idea what's going on.
Right.
They're just as addicted, again, as their children, and but it's affecting the development of the family, interpersonal relationships, and particularly our relationship with God.
Right.
To me, here's the, kind of the difficult part of all this, too. There's more Catholic content, and I found this myself. I was obsessed with apologetics. I've noticed that I was more willing to consume content than to be consumed by God. So I'd rather go listen to another conversation instead of me go praying and talking to God myself, because I had to listen to the new thing that, Bishop Aaron said, or, name the person, right?
Right.
So there is an over-consuming, I think, even of good things in particular that, we have to start to create boundaries around for ultimate freedom.
So the best thing for people to do, Andrew, is to go to the website to find out more about the detox program?
Yeah, humanility.org. Again, we also have that partnership with Hallow, which I think they're helping people use technology for good. We have a whole 30-day detox there, 150,000 people who've gone through it. I have a few other, interviews on our website. You can kind of learn more and go in depth of our teaching. But yeah, anyone right now listening that wants to go through this actually can start this themselves, or hey, you're at a high school, you're at a university, you want to launch this, just reach out to us and we'll help you get launched.
Thank you, Andrew. Great discussion. Look forward to having you back on. Andrew Laubacher, Executive Director of Humanility.org. And check out their wonderful Digital Detox Wellness Program. We'll be right back. Well, this is a real treat. One of the things I love so much about living abroad part-time is meeting so many wonderful people in the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, including my next guest, Friar Luca di Pasquale, a Franciscan friar and Catholic priest belonging to the Seraphic province of Assisi, a graduate of sacred scripture and archaeology, fascinating, studying in Jerusalem, And he's been involved in ministry and preaching, serving with the custody of the Holy Land, including preaching at solemn events such as the Feast Day of St. Anthony. And he has a very strong Franciscan role as well, holding positions of responsibility for events related to, of course, what's going on right now with St. Francis and the 800th anniversary, and also managing the reception of a relic from Nazareth in Assisi in 2025. A beautiful background. There's a lot more information about this wonderful Friar Luca, and we'll have him explain. But first, I just want to welcome him to the program. Friar Luca, it was so nice to meet you at Mass at St. Mary of the Angels. What do you think so far of how things went with the relics? I thought it was absolutely beautiful, very reverent, and so meaningful for the people who attended. What are your thoughts looking back over the past month?
Greetings to all of you from the Art of Assisi. You did a presentation that's bigger than me. It's a joy to share this extraordinary season of grace with our brothers and sisters. Living in Assisi is a gift, but February 22nd was a moment that will carry my heart forever. Before the public opening of the tomb, we friars, minors, conventuals, and Capuchins gathered in prayer around our founder. And I had the grace of standing alone before his remains just before the translation. And for me, it wasn't meeting a historical figure. It was meeting a father. I felt like a son returning to a beloved parent after a long time. It was a moment to say thank you for the charism that gave me spiritual life, but also to ask for forgiveness for the times I haven't been worthy of it. And in those few bones, I saw the immense power of littleness. And when I lead pilgrims to the body of St. Francis, I see many faces filled with doubt, yet they are moved to tears before those remains. So, there is a beautiful spiritual detail. The veneration takes place beneath the four vaults of the lower basilica. But if you look up from the bones of Francis, you see him frescoed in glory, dressed in gold. And it is a powerful message for us that same poverty, humility, and smallness led him to the light of paradise. To understand the end of Francis' life, we must look at his profound solitude. At the beginning of his conversion, he was alone, misunderstood by his father, and mocked by his friends. At the end of his life, he experienced an even deeper second solitude. His own friars, the very family he founded, began to find him too difficult. They felt his rule was too rigid for a global order. They asked him to step aside. Imagine the pain of a father being told he's no longer fit to lead his children. And in this darkness, Francis didn't become bitter. He withdrew to Mount Laubacher to listen once again to the crucified Christ. And on Laubacher, Francis asked for two things: to feel the pain Christ felt on the cross, and to feel the love Christ felt for those who abandoned him. And the stigmata were the answer. They weren't just mystical wounds. They were the physical seal of a love that gives itself even when it is not accepted. Francis returned to Assisi broken, bleeding, and nearly blind, and yet he was more configured to Christ than ever before. He was a man in agony, suffering from stomach ailments and joint pain. But while standing at San Damiano, sheltered by St. Clare because he was too ill, Francis composed the Canticle Brother Sun. And this is not just a poem about ecology as we often think today. It is a miracle of faith. Think about it. A blind man suffering in total darkness sings of the radiant sun. A man rejected by his brothers sings of praise. It teaches us that when we are tempted to turn inward in our pain, the only way to be saved is to look up. And he uses creation, the sun, the stars, the wind, to help him praise God because he sees in them the footprint of the Creator. He even adds verses for those who endure infirmity in tribulation, sanctifying the very pain he was living. And as he felt his end approaching, the city of Assisi wanted to keep him within the walls, fearing his body would be stolen as a precious relic. But Francis insisted, "Take me to the Portiuncola." And he wanted to die where everything began, in the place of grace and poverty. And his humanity in those last moments is very beautiful. He asked the friars to read the Passion according to John. He asked them to sing his canticle, adding the final verse to Sister Death. And as Chesterton famously said, the stars never looked down on a man so happy to die. And in his final hours, Francis showed us that holiness includes the tenderness of the heart. He sent for Lady Jacopa, a Roman noblewoman he called Brother Jacopa because of her strength of faith. And he asked her to bring him those almond cookies he loved so much.
I remember that story, yeah.
Yeah, and this is the final lesson of Francis. It is not only important to give love, but to have the humility to let ourselves be loved. And in those cookies and in that friendship, Francis tasted the sweetness of the kingdom before crossing the threshold. He didn't just die, he completed the Transitus, a passage into the arms of the Father.
Yeah.
So,
Beautiful.
This centenary is not just a memory, it is a living flame for us. In fact, if you want or if you can follow our journey at centenarifrancescaniassisi.org. And we have a lot of initiatives like Francesco agli occhi tuoi, which means Francis in your eyes. It is a series of monthly dialogue with great figures like Cardinal Pizzaballa from the Holy Land or Brother Roberto Pasolini, which you can follow online via the Francesco Con Me app or YouTube or Facebook channel Frati Minori Assisi. Or there is an important moment for us on August from the 3rd to the 6th, where we will relive the chapter of the Mass. We are inviting young people from all over Europe and the world for the Go Franciscan Youth Meeting. And it's not just about listening, it's about doing. Through workshops in listening, art, theater, and others, these youth will draft a missionary charter to lead the gospel in their own countries. And, we are honored that Pope Leo XIV will join us on the final day to celebrate Mass and send these young people out as a messengers of peace.
So tell me, Father, I don't mean to interrupt you, but a question. So the young people will be coming up with their own charters. So the groups from different countries will have an opportunity to sit and pray and think about what they want to take home in terms of an evangelization model. Is that correct?
Yeah, because you have to know that in 1221 there was a chapter with all the friars all around Europe. And it was an important moment for the Franciscan charism because they shared their living, how they spread the gospel, and they went back to spread what they lived together with other people and with a kind of missionary charter that we want to relive with young people this year on August. Just after the 2nd of August, that is very important for us because it is the moment for the big celebration of the pardon of Assisi here in the Portiuncola, the little chapel that Francis rebuilt.
Yeah. Father, what does it mean to you as a Franciscan to see so many people, and as you said earlier, when you talked about the relics, and seeing so many people come to see the bones of St. Francis with doubt on their face, but seeing him still pouring himself out, they were moved and they've been changed. What does it mean to you to have this year-long effort declared by the Holy Father, Pope Leo, in allowing us to not only venerate St. Francis, but to learn more about him and to grow closer to him. What does it mean to you as a Franciscan friar?
Yeah, as I told before, for me is an important meeting with a father in my spiritual path. It was important not just because my faith will grow after that moment, because I don't need to see the bones of St. Francis for that. But it was very important for me as a friar, just because I had the possibility to see with my eyes the little body that changed the world and that continue to speak from her after 800 years, for me, for a lot of people, that he was an important person just because he trusted in God. And now he continues to be trusted just because he trusts in God. And so it is like a marathon. He lived the gospel, and he gave us the opportunity to live the same in our way in this particular moment. You know, it is a strange moment that now we are living, because there are a lot of wars, there are a lot of troubles, difficulties, and it seems that everything is ended. It seems that there are no values in these days. But at the same time, I think that to be in front of a person like St. Francis, in his humility, in his I said before that there is like a power of littleness in that bones. You can see all the fragilities in our humanity, but at the same time a fragility that was so close to God, to the Father, that can give us the opportunity to do better things just because we want to live in Him, and so we can share and spread the love that we need in these days.
Wow. Father, thank you so much. We've been chatting for the past 14 minutes with Friar Luca di Pasquale, a Franciscan friar and Catholic priest belonging to the province of Assisi, and with St. Mary of the Angels. St. Mary of the Angels, for those of you who are not familiar with the Assisi area, is actually the church. The city is named after the church, a very important papal basilica housing the Porciuncula, the little portion church that St. Francis loved so much, and also the chapel where he went to meet Sister Death. And Friar Luca giving us a very personal insight to what it's like to be there for this incredible time. We'll be right back on Catholic Connection. Stay tuned. Hope you enjoyed our special interviews this morning with Andrew Laubacher and also Friar Luca di Pasquale. Coming up in the second hour of Catholic Connection on a Wednesday on this feast of the Annunciation, Bill Donahue, the one, the only from the Catholic League, joins us. We're sitting down with Bill on his brand new book, Christianity in the Crosshairs, which I was proud to endorse. It's just a brilliant book, and he's really looking at a number of issues that we're facing. And what's so interesting about this book is that he looks at these different groups of people that are working together to fight all things godly and sacred. And he really breaks it down. I don't know if many people realize that Bill is a PhD and he's a sociologist, in addition to being a great commentator who appears, of course, with Raymond Arroyo on The World Over quite frequently, as well as other EWTN TV and radio programs, including this one. But I wanted to spend some time on the book because I think it's super important in terms of how he approaches this topic of Christianity being in the crosshairs. Last week we also spoke with Robert Royal about his book about persecution. And not to be, a Debbie Downer or, get overly obsessed with this kind of thing, but we need to always be aware Sometimes I think we take our freedoms for granted, and even though there is quite a bit of white martyrdom going on in our country, we don't yet have the red martyrdom. God forbid that should happen. But we can never put our, let's say, rest on our laurels just because we have an administration that is friendlier than previous administrations to matters of faith. There's still a lot of which we have to be aware, especially in terms of the Catholic faith and how the Catholic Church is still under attack. So he's going to talk about that, also societal implications. That's Bill Donahue, Christianity in the Crosshairs, coming up next. And of course, tomorrow, Sherry Brownwig will be sitting in. We'll talk to you later. Ciao, ciao.
Welcome to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Teresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Teresa Tomeo.
On a Wednesday, but not just on any Wednesday. As we mentioned earlier, it is March 25th, 2026, a feast of the Annunciation, a beautiful day in the church. Always an opportunity to study Scripture more closely and learn more about why the Church says what she does about various days on the liturgical calendar. Of course, the Annunciation, a very, very important part of our faith. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing to study and learn more about. Something else we need to learn more about is what's going on in terms of defending our faith in the public square. And this is what we're going to talk about, among other things, with the amazing Bill Donahue from the Catholic League, of course, which is based in New York City. Talk about dealing with challenges to the church and Christianity in general. But Bill has a fantastic new book out from our friends at Sophia, Christianity in the Crosshairs. It examines how cultural elites and radical movements have aligned to challenge Christianity in modern America. That's actually the subtitle in terms of how cultural elites and radical movements have aligned to challenge Christianity. And if you think about that, you think about the different radical movements we've seen, especially over the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, and you wonder, are they working together? Because they seem to disagree on some issues, but they certainly agree that they don't like family and they don't like faith. And somehow, through it all, they work together to attack the basic principles and teachings of Christianity, especially the Catholic Church, and as we mentioned, family. Now, a lot of people don't know that Bill has an incredible background in addition to being the president of the Catholic League, so he's been an outspoken defender of the faith for many, many years. But he also has a PhD in sociology, so he knows a lot about the human person, the dignity of the human person, and the impact that what we're seeing right now in our culture, in our world, is having on all of us. He also contends that the cultural transformation that's going on is not just happenstance, but very deliberate, aiming, as we mentioned, to weaken our liberties and suppress the Catholic faith, not just the Catholic faith, though, but religious influence in the public life. And as we mentioned, it analyzes this new book, how the ruling class, in alliance with radical leftist groups, is doing whatever it can to create a compliant citizenry, which means just do what you're told, don't make a fuss, just be quiet, just go to work, go home, have your dinner, drink a glass of wine. We don't want to hear from you. We're just going to tell you how to live. It's very scary, but he breaks it down. So we have 3 segments with Bill today. The book is so important that I wanted to spend a little bit more time. And we actually sat down with him a while ago, but because it's so important, and actually as we're going into Holy Week next week, something to think and pray about. So again, Bill Donahue with us this morning for 3 segments, Christianity in the Crosshairs, examining how cultural elites and radical movements have aligned to challenge Christianity in modern America. Of course, we'll have your news, but first, let's see what the weather is doing on a Wednesday morning. The National Weather Service saying this morning record-breaking heat expected in the central and western part of the country for the next several days. Gusty winds and low relative humidity will create elevated to critical fire weather conditions over portions of the Rockies and High Plains, both today and tomorrow. Rain and mountain snow are also possible across the Pacific Northwest into the Rockies through the rest of the day today. A few minutes past the hour now on a Wednesday morning. Let's check the news here on EWTN. Pope Leo XIV renewing his appeal for peace in a brief statement yesterday evening to a group of reporters waiting for him outside Villa Barberini, the residence in Castel Gandolfo. Recalling the international situation, Holy Father said hatred is increasing, violence keeps getting worse, more than 1 million people are isolated, and there are so many dead. He said we want to pray for peace, but he's urging all authorities to work through dialogue to resolve problems. President Trump, meanwhile, expressing optimism in the Iran conflict, saying it will end soon. Addressing reporters from the Oval Office yesterday, the president saying talks with Iran have been going well, adding the U.S. is dealing with the right people in the Islamic Republic. Trump saying Iran has now agreed not to pursue a nuclear weapon, adding that Iran has also offered a significant gift to the U.S. during the talks. He said it was related to oil and gas, but he would not reveal what it is at this point. And Mark Mayfield tells us there are reports that Iran apparently would prefer talking with Vice President Vance to end the conflict in the Middle East.
The New York Post cites sources saying the regime has signaled it wants to deal directly with Vance instead of Steve Witkoff or Jared Kushner. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt responded to the Post report, saying it's President Trump's choice to decide who will negotiate on his behalf, not Tehran's. She added Vance, Secretary of State Rubio, Special Envoy Witkoff, and Kushner will all be involved. The Guardian is also reporting that Iranian officials don't want to deal with Witkoff or Kushner, who led the previous talks with Iran. I'm Mark Mayfield.
The United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, has appealed to the international community to halt the violence plaguing the Middle East and allow unhindered access to provide emergency humanitarian aid to over 1.2 million children who have been displaced in Iran and Lebanon. The UN agency's deputy executive director warning that across the Middle East, a generation of children is being pulled deeper into crisis and is paying a devastating price due to it. And the Pope is also warning that children must not come to see artificial intelligence chatbots as substitutes for real friendship, cautioning that such reliance could harm their intellectual and emotional development. The Holy Father adding we must not allow children to end up believing that they can't find or they can find in artificial intelligence chatbots their best friends or the oracle of all knowledge, dulling their intelligence and their capability for relationships and numbing their creativity and thinking. EWTN News reporting Leo making the remarks in a message that was published in an Italian weekly supplement dedicated to children, marking its 30th anniversary. In that context, he urged adults to safeguard childhood and guide the growth of children so they may become protagonists of a renewed world. And a jury in New Mexico is saying Meta failed to safeguard its Facebook and Instagram apps from online predators targeting children. The judge in the case announcing the verdict yesterday.
Did Meta violate the Unfair Practices Act by engaging in an unfair or deceptive trade practice? The jury answers yes.
The ruling on Tuesday follows weeks of testimony that pitted the state against a social media giant in a civil case that could also impact several similar cases across the country. Meta must now pay out $375 million in damages for violating New Mexico's Unfair Practices Act. But Meta says it will indeed appeal. The Supreme Court taking up a high-profile case yesterday involving a government policy that turns away asylum seekers before they can reach the U.S. border with Mexico. Representing the Trump administration was Assistant to the U.S. Solicitor General Vivek Suri.
Respondents' position is that when Congress said arrives in the United States, it meant stopped outside the United States. That theory is wrong for the simple reason that it defies the statutory text.
That policy was enacted during the Obama administration and was significantly brought in during the first Trump administration. It's no longer in place after being rescinded by President Biden 4 years ago. However, the Trump administration calls it a critical tool for addressing surges in immigration at the border, and court observers say the justices appeared at least somewhat sympathetic to that argument. And London police are investigating an incident involving ambulances belonging to the Jewish community being set on fire. Officials saying the apparent arson attack is being treated as an anti-Semitic hate crime. It happened earlier this week when 4 ambulances belonging to a Jewish community ambulance service were lit on fire. No injuries were reported. There have been no arrests, but police say they believe there are 3 people involved.
And the heat dome that has millions in the Southwest suffering record-setting temperatures, as we mentioned in the weather forecast, making its way to the southern plains. Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas bracing for record highs this week. Parts of the Midwest could also be affected. Meanwhile, the heat wave is nowhere near over in the Southwest, with high temperatures expected through the rest of the week. And authorities in southern Arizona are investigating a possible incident at Nancy Guthrie's home 3 weeks ago before she was abducted. Liz Kurtz reports that as the investigation continues, members of the local community continue to hope that she will be found.
At one of Nancy's favorite Tucson restaurants, El Charro, all servers are now wearing a symbol of hope. These yellow ribbons made by two women from out of state. It's something they did in 2003 when Lacey Peterson went missing, and in 2005 for Natalie Holloway.
The 84-year-old mother of Today's Show host Savannah Guthrie is believed to have been taken from her home in the early hours of February 1st. The local sheriff's office confirming that the department is now looking into a situation that took place 3 weeks ago before her disappearance. Mark Wayne Mullen is now Homeland Security Secretary. In a ceremony at the White House on Tuesday, the president calling it a great day because he has a great deal of confidence in the new pick. The Oklahoma Republican senator taking the reins during a tumultuous time at the agency, with the DHS shutdown in its sixth week, and it led to long lines at TSA checkpoints and airports throughout the country. The president tapping Mullen after he fired Kirstie Noem and moved her as special envoy for the Shield of America, the anti-drug initiative in the Western Hemisphere. And Jack Crumley says tax season is back, and so is that child tax credit.
As families gear up for tax season, the child tax credit is once again front and center. CPA Lisa Green-Lewis with TurboTax.
That credit is a credit you get for each dependent under 17.
For 2025 returns, the credit remains $2,200 per qualifying child under the age of 17, up to $1,700 refundable for many households. Green-Lewis says there are some restrictions.
It does have income thresholds, so if you're single and if you earn $200,000 and under, you would get the full credit. If you're married filing jointly, it's $400,000.
The IRS is reminding parents that even those who don't normally file may still be eligible for a refund through the additional child tax credit. Your dependent child must have lived with you for more than half the year. And don't forget, the tax filing deadline is Wednesday, April 15th at midnight.
And several neurologists in Argentina are using tango, the tango dance, as a type of therapy for Parkinson's patients. They say the slow, short steps in the country's national dance help with mobility, balance, and coordination issues. The program at a facility in Buenos Aires, which began 15 years ago, is designed to give Parkinson's patients strategies to use in everyday activities. And finally, in our newscast on a Wednesday morning, Jim Roop tells us NASA is announcing plans to build a $20 billion base on the surface of the moon.
The move means, however, the agency's canceling plans to deploy a space station in lunar orbit, which was billed the Lunar Gateway Station. The update was unveiled as part of the agency's Ignition event, outlining multiple initiatives aimed at landing on the moon by the end of 2028. NASA's revamped initiatives come as China challenges the U.S.'s position as the world's leader in space exploration after the nation announced it was on track to land astronauts on the moon by 2030. I'm Jim Roop.
It is a Wednesday morning. We appreciate your listenership here at EWTN. We'll be right back. Well, we're honored and blessed to have not one, not two, but three segments with my dear friend and also amazing leader on the front lines in all things Catholic, Christian, and society, our friend Bill Donahue from the Catholic League. Brand new book, and you may have seen the excellent interview he did with our very own Raymond Arroyo last week on The World Over. Christianity in the Crosshairs, Ruling Class and Radicals Find a Common Enemy, published by our friends at Tam Books. Congrats, Bill. Another great book.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the endorsement. I very much appreciate it. It's doing very well. It's been sitting there as the #1 bestseller among new releases and religious intolerance and persecution, sold out in Amazon. We're bringing more copies in a couple of weeks, and overall it's still doing well in all the different formats. So I think I've just been kind of lucky to hit a chord at the right time. You know, as an author yourself, a lot of things are luck. It's just a matter of timing. And I think a lot of Christians are just fed up.
Yeah, I want to get into the book, and this actually what the questions I have first really tie into it. Two situations that are developing. A big breaking news story with the Thomas More Society, a big victory in California regarding the whole transgender ideology, which I know you cover in the book. But first, I know you've been following, as we all have, the developments with Iran. What are your thoughts after what happened over the weekend and what continues with Operation Epic Fury?
Well, the first thing that I want to talk about is imagery. You have people in Times Square, just up the block from me, 10 blocks away from where we're speaking right now, out there condemning America and mocking the president. And then you have young people over there in Iran who have taken to the streets, who are dancing, who are happy, who are waving the American flag and nice pictures of Donald Trump. Isn't it interesting that the people who live in this country, the pampered ones, the brats, who are out there showing how anti-American they are, did they want to tell those young people over in Iran that they're wrong? Do they want to say that to them? That the way they treat women, and for that matter gays, in Iran is something that they should continue to do so? I'm just struck by the hypocrisy on the left that they always support the most oppressive regimes, and yet they say they stand for liberation.
Liberation and inclusion, right?
Yeah, inclusion, yeah, including terrorists. Yeah, that would be at the top of the list. Listen, the Americans don't want nation building. That was a failure. George W. Bush was a good man, and he did say that he was not going to engage in nation building. Of course, he changed his mind. He did, and it turned out to be a disaster in many respects. But having said that, we know that Iran is the devil in the Middle East, and that their Arab brothers hate them. So, that's very important. They stand alone over there. So it was just a matter of time before we disabled their nuclear capability. We're not going in there killing civilians because it's not just Israel that's involved that in terms of their safety. It's the surrounding nations, let's say the Arab nations themselves. So we had an opportunity at this point to do something and to show you how basically stupid these leaders are in Iran. They all gathered, 40 of them in one place.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in this country, the president and the vice president are never in the same spot when there's any kind of national security threat. No, something had to be done. Now, the big question on the table is not whether or not we're going to win militarily. That's a foregone conclusion. The question is who's coming in. There are hardline people who are worse. The guy who runs the Revolutionary Guard, is a front page story about it in the New York Times today, is probably the biggest barbarian of them all. So anyone who thinks that you're going to get Thomas Jefferson out of this, got to be careful. There are people certainly who should be there, but let's remember all those young people who love America and who want freedom and are glad that the Ayatollah is gone. They don't have any guns. So the people who have the guns always rule, and the question is, will there be enough fissures within the militia so that more moderate people can come to the table? I don't know that. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that. But that's the big looming question. Who's coming up next?
Well, speaking of, you mentioned the New York Times. I'm sure you heard about the Washington Post and an opinion piece they did over the weekend when this all began. After we found out the Ayatollah was killed among those other leaders, describing him as someone who really was, I'm paraphrasing, but gentle, but that he loved poetry, he loved Les Miserables. It's like, what in the world? I don't get it.
Well, Hitler, they said, loved dogs. Really? He did. He loved dogs. What am I supposed to do with that? He also happened to put people into ovens because they were Jewish. Is that a side story? I mean, the Washington Post, I went over this the other day. I have a pretty good head for figures. 2 years ago, they lost over $100 million. Last year, it was 125, and the year before that was 73 million. And how the hell do you even stay in business?
Right.
When you run up a deficit like that? They don't know what they're doing. The Washington Post is teetering. Bezos took it over. If they're talking about how the people who are out there and kill and destroy their own innocent people, how many tens of thousands just recently, and they're talking about that. I think Hitler wasn't he a vegetarian or something like that? What are we supposed to do with this information?
Right.
Why even bother to mention it?
Well, it just shows you how out of touch they are in the media overall.
Oh, they live in a bubble.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an intellectual ghetto.
All right, one more story before we take a break and dive into the book more deeply, but this will probably come up because of the prominence of this issue. Let me just read the press release from the Thomas More Law Society that came out. In a historic and groundbreaking ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court yesterday granted the Thomas More Society emergency application in Mirabelli versus Bonta, holding that secret gender transition policies in schools violate the religious liberty and due process rights of parents. This is huge, is it not, Bill?
It is, but it should have been 9-0, not 6-3.
Right.
But nonetheless, that we have an affirmation of parental rights, which have been undermined by the National Education Association in particular. They've been leading the fight against the rights of parents to know what's going on with their own children in the school and indeed even with their own bodies. It really should be disabled. It's a disgrace that we have a teachers union which works against the students and against the parents. Thank God for the Supreme Court and for the people that President Trump had appointed there to bring about this victory. It's astonishing at this late date that there's any support left for this transgender mania.
Right.
We've seen what's happened in Europe and in this country. People have turned against it. It's only the elites that are left, the Harvard Medical School and people like that. They're the last ones. People like Harvard Medical School, the last ones in this country to figure it out, that what you're doing is child abuse. And I want to use that term explicitly. To take a minor, I don't care about an adult, to take a minor and to change that person's sex and help them, which you can't do anyhow biologically. It's an impossible feat. And to do it behind the back of the parents, this is pretty scary stuff. But this has been going on now for a long time, and it's been led by the elites. It's not the cops and the firemen whose daughters want to become a boy. It's the ones with the postgraduate degrees. We got a real problem with the elites in our society.
And even at the State of the Union last week, when you had that young woman and her family standing up, a detransitioner, no one on the left stands up.
It boggles the mind. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the old days of JFK and LBJ and then Hubert Humphrey, and in fact, Jimmy Carter. They would never go along with something like this. They'd all think it's insane. Remember, Obama at one time was more on our side, but then he changed when the cultural winds were changing with the ruling class.
Right.
So, yeah, the Democratic Party today is simply something which is unimaginable compared to what it was 25 years ago and especially 50 years ago.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned the timing of the book. We have about a minute left before the break, but I want to reintroduce our guest, Bill Donahue from the Catholic League, and his brand new book, which is doing extremely well. So you can order it. Of course, it's from TAM Books. Christianity in the Crosshairs, Ruling Class and Radicals Find a Common Enemy. So many stories, Bill, tie into what you're discussing in this book, especially the most recent decision just coming out yesterday from the Thomas More Society.
There's no question about it. What the central thesis is that unlike the past, where you had the radicals and the ruling class at each other's throats, over the last few decades, particularly during the Biden administration, but it's still there right today, you have too many people who are the major decision makers, the elite decision makers in government, in the corporation, and in education, clearly in education, in the arts, entertainment industry, in the media, in the major institutions in our society, the medical schools and the like. These people have adopted the thinking of radical activists and intellectuals. And because it all comes down to one thing. What motivates these people? Control. They want to control. We're talking about thought control and we're talking about behavioral control. And what I try to do in the book is to say, hey, listen, our English friends understood this back in 1932, Huxley, Brave New World, back in the late 40s, Orwell.
Hold that thought, Bill. We're going to get cut off by the satellite break. We'll pick it up right after the break. You're listening to Catholic Connection on EWTN and our guest, Bill Donahue. Stay tuned. One of my favorite guests here on Catholic Connection. He does such great work, and he is such a straight shooter. Our friend Bill Donahue from the Catholic League, CatholicLeague.org. His brand new book is flying off the shelves, as we say. Selling like hotcakes. We're old enough to remember those cliches. Christianity in the Crosshairs, Ruling Class and Radicals Find a Common Enemy. Okay, I asked you a question that was my fault. I was so engrossed in your conversation, your comments, I forgot the music was playing, musical chairs here. I asked you a question about the timing of this book. It's always God's timing, but it's amazing how perfectly this book fits exactly what's going on in the news just this week, Bill.
It is amazing. I think it's just a matter of divine providence, quite frankly, because it's not me. I can't control the timing of the culture, But I think it's just coming together that so many Christians have come together. And it's not just Christians. We're a Judeo-Christian culture. I have a lot of Jewish friends, and they're concerned about the way things are going as well. And it's people who accept a more traditional understanding of morality who are concerned by secular militants who want to undermine it. So, yeah, I mean, the point of the book is to say that too often, not in every case, that's for certain, but too often the elites, the decision makers in our society, the ruling class, they have adopted the kind of philosophical cues that come from the cultural Marxist. And that's not a very good thing. So people say, why would they want to deal with these people? Why would you want to deal with Saul Alinsky? Well, Saul Alinsky and George Soros do have one thing in common. One of them, Soros, funds that kind of Alinsky-type radicalism, but they both were joined at the hip in terms of control. Mm-hmm. It's about power. That's what motivates these people. What motivates the World Economic Forum to come together in Davos, Switzerland every year to think about different ways in which they can control the population in the world? And then you have guys like Yuval Harari who says, what are we going to do in the future about the useless people? Just think about that. We useless as Christians, people. We don't talk about useless people. There are no such things as useless people. But this is the way the secularists think. And then the question is, will we give them more drugs? That's a good way. The Romans figured that out, right? And bread and circuses. Can we give them more welfare? Can we make them dependent? Because the goal, as Bill Ivey said in 2016, an advisor to Hillary Clinton running for president, the goal is a compliant citizenry. Compliant citizenry. We want a docile, passive bunch of average Joes out there. Let them golf and let them go to work and do what they want, but they are not going to make the decisions. They're going to do as we tell them to do. And that, to me, is a big part of our problem today.
We mentioned the story coming out of California with the teachers controlling things in terms of pushing the parents out of the picture with this whole transgender ideology. But I'm thinking of another story that we discussed during the break, which is so obvious in terms of you're talking about the ruling class and the elites. If you think about what happened with Mondami and these police officers who were pelted with snowballs, several of them were injured, pieces of ice and whatnot, just recently, and Mondami insisting it was nothing more. It didn't look that bad. It looked like a snowball fight. As you said during the break, there were images of these police officers with pieces of ice hanging from their heads. And the police union came out against the mayor saying that, this, and, even the commissioner, the same thing. This is, I think, a good example because here you have Mondami, right? Someone in an elitist position as a mayor of New York City. And then you have these radicals on the streets going after the police officers.
Well, he doesn't like the police. He's made that very clear. First of all, the gaslighting is not working, and that's what he's trying to do. 2 of these cops wound up in the hospital. He said it was a bunch of kids in a snowball fight. Kids in a snowball fight, they don't wind up in the hospital. These guys did. They almost took out the eye of one of the cops. And they weren't kids. One of the guys was holding a huge piece of ice ready to hit the cop in the head. They got a picture of him. And, of course, he has a rap sheet. All right, he's not a 15-year-old kid. He's a 27-year-old guy who's got a rap sheet. So, but, it's the same. Mondami, of course, is now condemning the United States for trying to liberate the people in Iran. Yep. So wherever you see the United States in terms of law enforcement, in terms of national security, or in terms of law enforcement in terms of urban security, he works against them. Miranda Devine, she's a wonderful woman. She writes for the New York Post, and she rightfully refers to him as an Islamic Marxist, and that's what he is. And of course, he's a millionaire, too. All these people are filthy rich, but that's a whole other story. The elites in our society, some of them are getting it. There's no question. Trump has turned some of them, and there's some movement in Silicon Valley and the like, but we have a long ways to go.
Yeah, that's why your book is so important. Christianity, the Crosshairs, new book from our friend and guest, Bill Donahue of the Catholic League. I love the chapter titles because they're so direct. And this is what I loved about this book. It's so clear. There's no, guessing as to what you're going to be discussing. What makes the ruling class and radicals tick? The quest for a compliant citizenry, thought control, behavior control, the family under fire, whose children are they? Population control, why religion threatens elites and radicals, smearing Christianity, and stealth maneuvers. I mean, this is just incredible in terms of summarizing it in a way people can understand. Now, another story I wanted to look at, of course, it's now moved from the front pages and you barely mention it anymore, and the media fall right in line with this. So the whole situation in Minnesota, especially, of course, in Minneapolis during the extreme cold, but the whole situation with ice. And there were images, and I just shook my head watching it, of people going to pickup trucks, very similar to what we saw in Seattle and, of course, back in Minneapolis in 2020, literally going to the back of these pickup trucks, picking up their signs, their protest signs, waving to the camera, like very bold and out there. So you had, right, the leaders in Minnesota, for the most part, agreeing with these people, whether it be the mayor or the governor, and then you have these radicals on the street. Are these the kind of alliances that you look at in the book as well, Bill?
Absolutely. I mean, here once again, the ruling class typically wouldn't accept the ideas coming from the cultural Marxists, but now, increasingly over the years, they certainly have, because they all want control. Thank you for the comments about my writing. My staff will know that when it comes to writing, the most important word in the English language for Bill Donahue is clarity. Mm-hmm. I don't like to obfuscate. People say, well, what did Marx really mean? This is a game, okay? You shouldn't have to obfuscate. Just put it on the table. And people like clarity and not mincing words. Now, we got a serious problem here with the ruling class, but let's remember what C.S. Lewis said. He said, be careful of the quiet men, the ones in the suits. Pope Francis talked about polite persecution. John Paul II talked about soft totalitarianism. Tocqueville talked about democratic despotism. Montesquieu talked about the same phenomena. We're not talking about Hitler and Mao and Stalin, that hard totalitarianism. We're talking about a much more subtle and much more sinister form of control. They want to be able to get thought control. They want to be able to engage in behavioral control, but they can't succeed. And this is a large part of the book. The whole second half of the book is about they can't succeed, the ruling class, with their radical ideas unless they can disable the family and disable Christianity. Mm-hmm. That's where the average Joe lays anchor. He's attached to his family. Well, if he's attached to his family, he's attached to his God. That stands in the way. They want the attachment to be to them. That's why you get the compliant citizenry. You do as you're told to do. So this is a much more subtle, seductive way. It's intellectual rape, basically, is what it's coming down to. And they use these kind of measures in the schools. And, for example, when they tell you what pronouns you should use. Mm-hmm. Well, if a boy is a girl, he can't be a girl. So you have to refer to a boy as a boy, and you don't refer to as a single unit individual as they. People might say, well, if that's what they want, that's okay. No. Now what you're doing is you're lying to yourself. We all know that men can't get pregnant, even though the ACLU says you can, and they teach this in the medical schools. We all know it's a lie. Males have XY, women have XX. There are certain things which are fixed by nature. But see, that's at the heart of it. Going back to the Marxists, they don't believe in human nature. Right. Marx certainly didn't. So if you change the environment, then you can change the human nature. Then you can get people to do what you want. It's pernicious.
I can't believe we only have one segment left. We need another hour. Talking with my friend Bill Donahue, fantastic book I was proud to endorse. Christianity and the Crosshairs, Ruling Class and Radicals Finding a Common Enemy. We'll be right back. I knew this would go by quickly, way too quickly. I always appreciate the insight, the intelligence, and all the information that Bill Donahue and his wonderful team at the Catholic League bring us. Of course, he's a regular on EWTN, including on Raymond Arroyo's The World Over. He did an extensive interview with Raymond just recently, which was fantastic. I was able to catch it in preparation for my interview with Bill this morning. Okay, another story. I mean, this book ties in so perfectly with everything that's going on. Notre Dame, your thoughts with Notre Dame?
Well, it's a wonderful institution. Among the elite institutions, it certainly is the most authentically Catholic, but it's had its problems over the years. Remember, my great friend Mary Ann Glendon refused to receive a pro-life award at the same time they were giving all kinds of kudos and ceremonial goodies to President Obama, who wasn't an abortion that he couldn't defend. So they've had those kinds of problems. But unfortunately, this new president, Robert Dowd, he and John McGreevy, whom I've met, a very brilliant historian, but he sold out, and Mary Gallagher, whom I don't know, but she's the dean of a school there, and they were the ones who put Susan Osterman, with two N's at the end of her name, Susan Osterman. They moved her from a professoriate position into an Asian institute, and they wanted to anyhow. Then it came out that she doesn't just happen to be pro-choice. She is a pro-abortion zealot.
Advocate. I mean, huge.
Condemns crisis pregnancy centers. She says that the pro-life movement was rooted in racism. No, Susan. You must be mistaking that for Margaret Sanger, who talked about black people as weeds that we have to eliminate. Does she know anything about that? And how did she even become a professor? Never mind being running an institute. Anyhow, Father Bill Campbell is a wonderful historian and priest. He led the charge. Bishop Rhodes, Fort Wayne,
love
South
him.
Bend.
Yep.
About 20 bishops, including Archbishop Paul Coakley out of Oklahoma, who's also the head of the USCCB, the Bishops' Conference. A lot of people who have gotten awards said, we don't want the awards if this is the way it goes. The alumni, led by the Sycamore Trust, and let's not forget the students. The students there, many of whom are more Catholic than the people who run their institution, they all spoke up, and this was not going away. It went on for week after week, and finally she had to resign. Now, look, no one should mistake Notre Dame for Georgetown, which is totally gone. They have two pro-abortion student clubs on the campus. They have a student government there which has tried to silence students who happen to accept the church's teachings on sexuality. They also have a professor there who actually believes that slavery and rape are justified provided that the slave master and the rapist are Muslim. I've written about this. I can give the names. I don't shoot from the hip. I'm very, very specific. All right? And this is the kind of thing that they don't have going on at Notre Dame, but we want to make sure that we keep Notre Dame Catholic. And there are problems. It always comes from within. It always comes from... Listen, and the reason for this, Christian Smith, I don't know him. He's a fellow sociologist at Notre Dame. He recently wrote a piece in First Things as to why he left Notre Dame. He gave 3 reasons why there's a problem at Notre Dame. One of them is one that I've talked about for years, and that is the craven need of Catholics, particularly in big positions, not just in the academy, but they want the affirmation, they want the applause, they want the acceptance of the
but why, Bill?
elite.
Here's the thing. Okay, I know the media and the culture, but it's such a small group of people in terms of, because you were saying, we were talking before we started the interview earlier in the hour, you go to your local pub and you're talking with all kinds of people in New York City, which is very diverse, and everybody gets the whole gender ridiculousness, the insanity there. And so what is the appeal? What does it get them in terms of doing this? That's what I don't get.
They don't feel comfortable in their Catholic skin. They know that the secular elites look at us and they say, the traditional Catholics like you and me, we're the closed-minded ones. They're, of course, the open-minded people. Their minds are so open, the brains fell out. But that's the way they feel about this. It's just astonishing to me that, why would I care what the New York Times thinks about me? They've been writing about me for decades, usually not very favorable. They've had big 4 different big stories about me. What do I care about them? I have my buddies at the bar. What the hell do I care about the New York Times thing?
Well, here's the thing, though. I mean, this isn't going away because there are some really good commentaries out there on various sources. And one I thought was, okay, yes, praise God for these students and these strong bishops that stood up. But what is she doing there in the first place? That, I think, is the core and you just addressed that briefly, but this is the issue here. What is she doing there in the first place? Why was Obama allowed to give the commencement address years ago? I mean, this is a problem. Houston, we have a big problem.
Well, I do have a segment later in the book also on this, and I've written about this extensively in the past. Why are dissident Catholics given such reverential treatment by the hierarchy? And unfortunately, now look, I want to make very clear about this. There are some wonderful nuns whom I love and I support financially. There's one order after another. However, there's more than quite a few nuns who have totally gone off the reservation, and people know it. And it's also true of some priests, and I hate to say some bishops. I was very disappointed that Pope Francis welcomed in Sister Jean Gravick, who's rejected the Catholic Church's teachings for decades summarily, and she was treated with kid gloves because Father Martin, another dissident, was pushing her. Now, I mean, we have a problem within our own house. And I know, talking to my Protestant Jewish friends, there are divisions and fissures within their houses too. There are people who just simply are there to change the institution. I've always said, if you don't like a Catholic school in the tenets and what they believe in, then go someplace else.
Right.
But it all begins in the faculty hiring. And I've been in too many search committees when I was a professor at a Catholic school to know that, in fact, if they regard you as too Catholic, they don't want you.
It's just, I mean, that's why I'm so grateful for the Cardinal Newman Society, because they paint this out very clearly. We're going to be talking with them. We talk with them every Tuesday in the second hour of the program. Speaking with Bill Donahue, his latest book, Christianity in the Crosshairs, Ruling Class and Radicals Find a Common Enemy. It's available on our EWTN catalog. Of course, you can get it on Amazon as well and other places. TN Books is the publisher. Okay, last but not least, I do want to discuss an area. I want to discuss an area in which, of course, I'm very interested. The media. In terms of overall, we mentioned already the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they're having major problems. Again, they are falling right in line with this whole idea of these elites and radicals and the way they paint these various entities, correct?
There's no question about it, particularly the New York Times. The Washington Post under Bezos shows some signs of going back and forth and being more honest about it. I don't know what the future is of the Washington Post, but clearly the New York Times. I mean, they are the elite. That's the newspaper of record. Let's remember that we don't have that many newspapers left anymore, and the ones that we do have left, they take their cues from the from the New York Times, to a lesser extent the Washington Post, and certainly from the Associated Press. That's the only wire service really left outside of Reuters, the British one, and they're funded by the Associated Press is funded by left-wing organizations. So people aren't going to give them money unless they expect something for their buck. And they're getting it. The Associated Press has tilted things our way constantly, and it's also true of these places like PolitiFact, left wing. I just went over this this morning with the staff. They said, "Oh, listen, transgender people are not any more violent than anybody else. They only account for 10% of all the violent mass shootings, but they're only 1% of the population."
Right.
So disproportionately, they are a major threat. But you see, and they're supposedly a fact checker. No, they're on the left. You have to keep on digging and try and find the right source because too many people in the elite circles, again, it comes down to control. They want to control the way you think. They want to control your behavior. And they certainly showed that in COVID. And I have a big section there, a chapter, where all the elites, Nancy Pelosi, Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, Obama, they all went to events where they were served by people who had to wear the mask, and none of them who were served had it on. They all knew it was a scam from the beginning. It's just about control.
Well, Gretchen Whitmer, she's still being investigated for what happened with our nursing homes. I know a similar situation happened in your area in New York, but she came out and admitted a few months ago, "Oh yeah, I had some," and the media don't pick up on it, considering the way the media went so crazy with COVID and supporting all of these efforts, right? And going after anyone, not even anyone who basically went out on a limb and disagreed, but people who expressed minor opinions on their Facebook pages were basically shut down and silenced, radio silence in terms of their existence. But Whitmer came out and admitted she had bad information during COVID. So where's the follow-up with the media when that was such a huge story 24/7?
Well, when you have a near monopoly in the media, I mean, obviously there are differences. We've got a number of different cable outlets and the internet and EWTN and others that we fight back, but we definitely are the minority. But they know that they're in the driver's seat, and they protect each other. Unless there's a fight within, and that does happen because that's human nature. Even if you're on the same side politically, they may be jealous of your success and they start fighting. That's the only kind of breakthrough that we can hope for, because when that happens, then you can see things falling out. Barry Weiss at CBS,
I was just going to say that. You read my mind. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post. Now we're looking at the Ellisons perhaps taking over Warner Brothers, and you could have a change at CNN. It may go back to the middle. So there
but that's the thing. I want to stop you right there, not to interrupt you, but sorry, my Italian's really getting up here. And I know you're Irish, so you appreciate where I'm coming from. This is the thing. You said getting back to the middle. That's what journalism is supposed to be. They're not saying we're going to take it all the way to the right. It's way, way, way extreme, way, way on the left now, and has been for decades. What they're talking about with these various media outlets are coming back to the middle. The media at CBS, the news people at CBS went nuts when they heard that she was coming on, Barry Weiss, who left the New York Times and started a very successful online investigative reporting outlet, the Free Press, which has done really well and produces some good stuff. She herself, isn't she married to a woman? She's a lesbian. She's pretty liberal in terms of her thoughts, but she's saying, no, when you come to media, you need balance. We have to get back, and they're going crazy.
Yeah, well, you see, she doesn't count now as a lesbian any more than Clarence Thomas is really not a black man. Scott Bessent is really not gay himself. You see, whenever you're on a conservative side, It's always been about ideology. It's never about anatomy. It's never about race and things of that nature. They know what to do. It's not ancestry and anatomy. It's all about ideology. And then they just can declare you not being a gay person. You're not a black person. You're not. Rubio's not really Hispanic because they make up these terms. Remember, Bill Clinton was the first black president. They said so. They live in a world of lies and that's what we have to get it through. Our people have to understand that when you hear somebody on radio and TV, I keep saying this, if an expert says something which strikes you in the gut as being simply wrong, trust your gut, people. Don't trust the so-called expert.
Well, let me just give you a quick example. You mentioned the wire services, and most people don't realize the New York Times, Washington Post, AP, those are the three main ones. And most news outlets, I don't care how large or small they are, just simply out of a matter of convenience and seeing what the headlines are, they turn to those resources to see what are the big stories. So everything, even at your local TV or radio station or the newspapers that are left, is going to be somewhat dictated by those major outlets because they have the majority of the services the media see. And even when I put my news together, I was talking to our operations manager, my general manager, Jack Williams, 2 weeks ago. We're looking at, different wire services where we get our audio. And I told him, I said, basically, I'm saying to you, and you know this because we've known each other for a long time, I could write a newscast bill with my eyes closed, okay? Within 5 minutes, I could pull it together 10 minutes because that's my training. I've been doing it for 45 years. But I don't do that because I want to be careful with it to make sure it's well written. But I find myself every single day looking at these wire stories and making sure that they are in the middle. And that takes a lot of time. And people don't realize this is what's out there. That's why it's so important. Your book is so helpful in terms of discernment.
Well, you're right. You see, but you're a pro, and I'm a pro, and we have that time and that level of discernment, and we can see through the weeds on this stuff. The average person, they're bright, but they don't have the background and they don't have the time in particular, and so they get these things. They might say, well, I'm not so sure now. It's like you used to wait in line in the grocery store.
We're out of time, but that's why they need your book, Bill Donahue's Christianity and the Crosshairs. We've got to have you back on. Great stuff, Bill. Appreciate you every day. We appreciate your listenership. This has been the second hour of Catholic Connection on EWTN's Radio Extra on a beautiful Wednesday, middle of the 5th week of Lent. Thank you, Jesus. And thank you, Our Lady. Feast of the Annunciation. It's kind of a cool day for me and my family because it's my dad's birthday. My father, Michele Annunziato Squilacci, or actually Schilacci is a correct pronunciation. That's his birthday. He passed away in 2010. I can't believe it's been 16 years. Time flies, doesn't it? And it went by quickly with our guest, Bill Donahue. And don't forget his wonderful book, Christianity and the Crosshairs, from Sophia. So what's coming up tomorrow on a Thursday? Well, first of all, it's going to be the lovely Sherry Brownrigg. She does a great job. I'm so blessed to have wonderful women with tons of radio experience, Sherry and Vanessa, who can guest host for me and do such a great job when I have other assignments that I have to cover for my work, all connected, of course, to the network. We're doing some more, as I mentioned the other day on Friday, some more reports connected to the new book that's coming out, the EWTN book, the second volume of Italy, Shrines and Wonders. Also some more promos for the beautiful series, the new series, the second series from EWTN Mission Advancement that I've done. This one is entitled The Unknown St. Francis. You can check it out at EWTN.com/St. Francis. That's it. Very simple. EWTN.com/St. Francis. So Sherry will be with us tomorrow, along with, of course, Father Mitch Pacwa with Cultural Connections. And we'll learn more about the wonderful way women can be involved at the very top in business from a very Catholic perspective, thanks to the group Legatus. Have a great Thursday, actually a Wednesday, and we'll talk to you soon. Ciao, ciao.